Right. Welcome to another Pro Football Doc Podcast. For me, the season has started. Of course, fantasy time and whatever, but the number one word around being thrown around is PUP. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But definitely the season has started. There's already the first game, the Hall of Fame game. And for the Hall of Fame game, we did switch over to Twitter Live a little bit for the Hall of Fame game. And I'm not necessarily going to be watching every Hall of Fame, every preseason game. We had a special guest, Michael Gelkin, here, who joined us in the Pro Football Doc Command Center. But in any case, we're going to, the season is here. And given the season is here, our special guest today, the topic we're going to talk about in detail is PUP. But if you Google PUP, this is obviously what comes up, some cute little puppy dogs here, but obviously that has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. So what we're talking about here is, what is PUP? It stands for physically unable to perform. So let me define for you a couple of categories as you hear things throughout this season. Physically unable to perform. There's two types. There's active and reserve. We'll come back to that. There is NFI, non-football injury. We'll come back to that. And then there's injured reserve. We'll come back to that as well. And then, of course, there's the COVID list thing, which is new. So PUP, what's the difference between active and reserve PUP? Active PUP is when you count against the roster, but you can be activated anytime. So right now it's a 90-man roster. If you're on PUP, you can count against the 90-man roster, and it's active PUP. You can come off anytime. Reserve PUP means you had to have started on PUP at the beginning of training camp. And when they convert you to reserve PUP, you do not count against the roster. So you can be outside of the 53 as the season starts. However, that carries with it a 6-week holdout, missing 6 games, missing the first 6 games of the season, the first 6 weeks of the season. But you don't count against a roster spot. That's the distinguishing difference. Pretty much everyone is on active PUP right now, and that's why they can come off at any point in time. NFI, non-football injury, in some ways very similar to what this PUP is, but the distinction is non-football injury means non-NFL football injury. So if you have an injury from college days or the off season before you were with the team, you can be NFI, non-football injury, even if you were hurt playing football. The NFL calls it not under their watch. And the big difference there for NFI is you don't even get paid if you're NFI, non-football injury, and et cetera. So that's the big difference. In injury reserve, the rules have changed, right? It used to be a one-way ticket, a couple of designated to return slots. And this year so far, it looks like everyone will be able to return because of roster flexibility and COVID, 3 weeks for injured reserve, and then you can come back after that, et cetera. Well, that's the overall. So how do you get off PUP? You pass a physical to get off PUP. And the passing of physicals are indeed subjective. Just because a player doesn't pass a physical doesn't mean he won't be ready to play this year. And just because a player does pass a physical doesn't mean that he's 100% or ready to go week 1. And we'll use Saquon Barkley as an example now and a little bit later when we do our injury rundown. But you have to come off PUP to practice with the team. You have to pass that physical to practice with the team. So the way it usually works is you're able to get benefit from rehab on the side. The team preserves its rights by putting you on active PUP. But once you pass a physical, you get the right and the benefit of practicing with the team. It may start with individual period. It may start with 7-on-7. It may ultimately get to 11-on-11. It doesn't have to the get-go. But for you to practice, you have to be off PUP. You can work on the side. That's fine. That's called rehab. And that's what's now happened to Saquon Barkley. Nick Bosa is playing. We'll talk about a lot of that. But that kind of is the background on PUP and what it means and how teams use it. So teams may have different thresholds. We're not going to take a guy off of PUP until he's ready for 11-on-11 because we can get our work done on the side, or let's get him off of PUP as soon as possible because we know he needs to get going on individual period and certain drills with the club, and it's easier to teach him the offense or the defense. So there's different thresholds. Now, part of this is a physical look. Passing a physical is not necessarily black or white. One team may pass a guy, one team may not. And with the similar criteria, one player may get passed on the same team and another may not, depending on what the team wants to do in the big picture. But something else came up this week about Carson Wentz and passing the physical. And we talked about it on Sports Grid. The reason why it came up is Carson Wentz's foot issue was said to have been, quote, pre-existing from high school. And so I was asked the question, if it's pre-existing from high school, how did the Colts doctors not know about it? How did potentially the Eagles doctors not know about it? And so let me explain to you the physical process. It's done by a team physician, and everyone has different thresholds. In that piece on Sports Grid, I talked about, and Ross has been on this show, on the podcast before, and we've talked about this. Ross used to not like me. I did not know this at the time. When Ross was playing in the NFL, he came to San Diego to get a physical, and apparently he was a little annoyed that I looked at him head to toe and x-rayed him head to toe. Well, I did that to be very thorough, but I totally could see where a team doc says, Carson Wentz, any issues with your feet? No. And he'd be honest. If you really drill down, I had something in high school, I don't remember, right? And if you look at his electronic medical records, he didn't have anything from the Eagles. And so there's no way the Eagles were hiding this from the Colts. And in some ways, it's coming back to bite the Eagles, right? Because they're probably going to end up with a second-round pick instead of a first-round pick with the time missed. But yes, it's possible to miss things on a physical because you don't necessarily x-ray and do everything head to toe. I will admit I probably over x-rayed people. I probably was a little too careful, but several times it had come in handy. One time a guy broke his foot the day after the physical, and the team was not happy with me. And I said, look, I x-rayed the foot. He had nothing there. So it was not pre-existing. Well, I can't do anything. And I x-rayed the foot for a different reason, but it gave me protection where the team couldn't be upset at me. So I've talked with Ross about this, and we joke about it now because we are friends and friendly. But that first time he was a little bit, I came on with him at Sirius, and it was actually in person, and he wanted to grill me on that. I said, oh, go ahead, And my question to Ross is, look, if you owned a team, would you want me being that overly thorough? I get, as a player, you were annoyed by it. But physical's in the eye of the beholder. Carson Wentz, there was nothing to hide there. It was a non-factor, and now it is. And we talked about last week when he might come back. All right, our next topic here is there's always two sides to every story. And we see it again here with, before we get to two sides to every story, let's go ahead and do two sides to every story here. Two sides to every story. Michael Thomas can't guard Mike. They tried to damage a reputation. You save theirs by not telling your side of the story. So more of the Michael Thomas saga. A couple weeks ago, came out, surgery in June, wouldn't be ready. We've been saying through our algorithm and our analysis that it's going to be at least mid-season, at least, before he's going to be ready. And something didn't make sense. And then the team basically came out and said, well, they wish he would have had the surgery earlier, and even reports that they lost communication with him. I've always said this: if something doesn't make sense, it does. We just don't know all the reasons. And the analogy I'll give you is my 8-year-old twins. If the two of them are fighting and one comes running to me and say, so-and-so hit me, it probably wasn't as clean as the one kid was minding her own business and my son came by and just hit her. It probably is more like she stole his toy, he pushed her, she pushed him, and then someone got incidentally hit or actually hit, right? I mean, there's usually two sides to a story. So I'm eager to hear Michael Thomas's side. I don't want to imagine what it is, but I think he should tell it. Look, if the Saints are throwing him under the bus and saying he went AWOL, which they basically have, he or his agent should tell his side of the story in terms of what they see and saw. But there's always two sides to any story, any controversy, etc. All right. I almost hate to do this, but it's just so everywhere. We'll touch on our weekly COVID take, so to speak. Let's start with Kirk Cousins. So he was a close contact, and he then was ruled out for a period of time. That's the risk players take by not being vaccinated. The close contact rules are different for them. The close contact rules are different for players who are vaccinated than those who aren't. I didn't make the rules. I'm not saying the rules are perfect. Don't get mad at me. I'm not getting involved in the who should or shouldn't get vaccinated. Look, I'm vaccinated. That was my choice. The players can choose and make their choices. They just can't choose their consequences. And there are consequences for not being vaccinated. So Kirk Cousins saying he's considering setting up plexiglass around where he sits in the meeting room to limit exposure. Look, the rules are trickier than that. I don't think it's that simple. Amy Trask, chimed in with this nice little cone, get smart bubble. But the game is rigged the other way. That's just the way that it is right now. And then take the case of poor Lamar Jackson, who's gotten COVID twice now, on the COVID list twice now, got COVID twice, apparently is unvaccinated, and apparently he's maybe thinking about it now. He would only need one of the two shots per protocol. But yeah, it's just complicated. And yes, 90% of the league, I think, is now, wrong thing there. 90% of the league is now indeed vaccinated, but that doesn't mean all teams are 88%, meet that 85% threshold. There's still a couple that are under it. But I urge you to go to my Twitter timeline and take a look at this. I mean, I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm just trying to tell you, a year ago, I wrote the viral lowered article about what players and coaches need to better understand, because remember, there were a lot of players and coaches saying, I don't understand the protocols and what they mean. And in the end, I think it made sense, but it was some education. This close contact thing, once again, the game of football by medical standards is not close contact. Yes, Delta is maybe 50% more contagious. It's something to follow. But last year, there were no cases of across the line of scrimmage transmission in terms of what's going on. All right, one other big theme for the NFL and football in general is the whole gambling angle. Oh, and before we get to that, I get why Jimmy Graham and other players are confused. Jimmy Graham tweeted, was basically forced into getting the vaccine. Now I'm just confused. And he tags NFLPA with all their new suggestions and rule changes. Yeah, I think that's how a lot of us feel. It's been a little bit of a moving target. And I'm not saying this to be critical of the NFL, the NFLPA, even government, but I get how the mixed messaging confuses people. And I don't blame Jimmy Graham for being a little confused, but it's going to be a moving target. That's what it's going to be. And currently, I get why he's frustrated, but the rules are going to be the rules. The final topic here, where is the league headed? Look, the Colts team itself is offering a $100 betting incentive. And that's a landmark change. This morning, BetMGM announced a partnership with Arizona Cardinals for retail and online sports betting, not just advertising, but right into the betting game itself. So it's coming, guys. I'm telling you, I'm not saying everyone's going to be a degenerate gambler and losing all their money and all this stuff, but look, what fantasy did for the NFL in expanding its popularity, what DFS did to improve the NFL on a weekly basis. Gambling's going to do that tenfold because blowout games can become interesting. Anything can, in game is ultimately where it's going to be. And that's one of the reasons we set up what we have, which is trying to help people with real-time injury analysis and in-game stuff as quickly as possible. And so that ultimately is why, I mean, look, come to Pro Football Doc, sign up for a free account. We try and do lots of things for free, but you can see all the updates. It's all free. All you need is an email and your password, and you're good to go. Still free right now. And we'll give you lots of the different information. We have it there first. And the reason why I like to put it there, Twitter is so fleeting, then you can't find it in 2 hours or 2 days, and certainly not 2 weeks. But there you can search a name. There's all sorts of other features, etc. But there's our little commercial. Go to sign up for ProFootballDoc.com. We have new other announcements too. We'll take a little break here, then we'll come back with the injury rundown and talk a little about other sports, what happened here, video, and cover some funny anecdotes. More to come, part 2 of the Pro Football Doc podcast next.